"Are you serious, Colonel?" Lieutenant Kyler Vance sneered, his voice slicing through the motor pool's tension. He gestured from his diagnostic tablet to the 65-year-old woman in faded fatigues. "You called in a grandmother to fix a multi-million-dollar tank my team has diagnosed for 36 hours. But Clara Callahan simply stared, listening to the machine's silence. Before I tell you how she found the problem with just a single wrench, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The scene was the 3rd Armored Brigade's motor pool on a damp, gray morning. The air, thick with the smell of diesel, hot metal, and damp concrete, hung heavy around the silent M1 Abrams. It sat like a fallen god on the stained floor, a 60-ton monument to modern warfare rendered inert by an invisible ailment. Standing before it were 2 figures representing different centuries. Lieutenant Kyler Vance, barely 25, was the embodiment of the new digital army. His uniform was crisp, his posture rigid, and his hand clutched a glowing tablet, a shield of data and logic. Opposite him stood Clara Clutch Callahan. At 65, her silver hair was tied back in a severe bun, and the lines on her face were a roadmap of a life lived under harsh suns and immense pressure. She wore a simple, washed-out set of camouflage fatigues, a uniform that seemed more a part of her than just clothing. Colonel Harding, the man who had made the controversial call, stood slightly aside, his face a mask of calculated calm. He was taking a monumental risk. This tank was the linchpin of a critical readiness exercise scheduled to begin in less than 2 days. Every hour it remained dead was another crack in the foundation of his career. Vance, emboldened by the silent smirks of his young engineering team, pressed his attack. "Sir, with all due respect," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "my team has run every Level 3 diagnostic protocol. We've analyzed the Honeywell turbine's output, checked every hydraulic pressure sensor, and cross-referenced terabytes of performance data. The computer is unequivocal, a catastrophic failure of the main power unit. It requires a full depot-level replacement. We need a flatbed, a crane, and 3 weeks we simply don't have." He tapped the screen for emphasis, the bright schematics a stark contrast to the grease and steel reality of the hangar. His engineers, all fresh from top universities, nodded in unison. To them, Clara was a relic, an analog ghost invited to a digital exorcism. The absurdity was almost comical. Clara remained unfazed. She ignored Vance and his glowing oracle. Instead, she began a slow, deliberate walk around the tank. Her movements were fluid, economical. She didn't glance at the diagnostic ports or access panels that Vance's team had obsessed over. Her attention was elsewhere. She ran a gnarled, calloused hand over the turret's cold, scarred steel, her touch surprisingly gentle, like a rider calming a wounded steed. The tank, a behemoth of composite armor and depleted uranium, seemed to rest under her touch, humbled by the ghost in its machine. She stopped at the rear, near the massive engine grills, and tilted her head, her sharp eyes scanning the layout not as a series of components, but as a single, interconnected body. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet and raspy, yet it cut through the hangar's low hum. How did she sound before she died? Vance blinked, momentarily thrown off by the question's primitive simplicity. Sound? The engine output was nominal until the point of failure. Decibel readings were within standard operational parameters. Clara's gaze, the pale, piercing blue of a desert sky, never left the tank. "That's not what I asked, Lieutenant. I asked how she sounded. Was it a clean shutdown or a dirty one? Did she scream or did she choke?" A few of the junior mechanics, standing nearby, shifted uncomfortably. They had been there. They had heard the final, guttural cough of the turbine, but they would never have thought to describe it in such visceral terms. It was a detail lost to the data logs. "The logs show a sudden, complete loss of power," Vance said stiffly. "Any strange smells?" Clara pressed, her eyes now tracing the complex web of hydraulic lines along the chassis. "Burnt fluid? Ozone? Anything sharp, out of place?" Vance let out a short, incredulous laugh. This was exactly the kind of pre-scientific nonsense he had expected. "Sir, we are well beyond sniffing for problems. This is a 1,500 horsepower gas turbine engine, not a lawnmower. The onboard computer monitors thousands of metrics per second. If there was an anomalous chemical signature, it would have been logged and flagged. The computer only knows what you tell it to look for," Clara murmured, almost to herself. She knelt, her knees cracking faintly in protest, and peered under the chassis, her eyes scanning the massive torsion bars of the suspension. The tension in the motor pool was escalating from a professional disagreement into a public spectacle. Soldiers from other bays began to gather at a respectful distance, their whispers a low buzz. They could feel the friction, the raw clash between two worlds, two philosophies. Vance felt his authority eroding with every passing second. This old woman wasn't just wasting time. She was making him look foolish in front of his own team and half the brigade. He had to end this now. Lieutenant Vance decided he'd had enough. He strode forward, physically planting himself between Clara and the tank, a symbolic reassertion of control. His face was flushed with indignation. "Colonel Harding, I have to formally object," he declared, his voice rising, sharp and authoritative. "This is a gross breach of protocol and a waste of what little time we have left. My team is ready to begin prepping the tank for transport. I must insist you ask your guest to leave this restricted area. She is a civilian liability." Colonel Harding's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth to intervene, but Clara moved first. Slowly, she rose to her feet, wiping her dusty hands on her fatigues. From a deep pocket, she pulled a small, worn object. It was an old Zippo lighter, its chrome plating worn down to the brass in smooth, familiar patches. With a practiced flick of her wrist, she snapped it open and shut. Click-clack, click-clack. The sharp, metallic sound echoed in the tense silence. Vance let out a disbelieving scoff. "What now? Are you going to fix a 60-ton war machine with a cigarette lighter?" But that sound, that rhythmic mechanical snap, was a key turning a lock deep in Clara's mind. For a fleeting, violent second, the gray, overcast sky of the motor pool vanished. It was replaced by a blinding, sandblasted sun. She was 25 again, crammed into the hot, suffocating engine bay of her own M1, her beloved hell on wheels. The air was a toxic cocktail of diesel, fear, and cordite. Outside, the world was a maelstrom. The scream of incoming shells, the terrifying roar of an Iraqi Republican Guard tank company cresting a dune just ahead. Her comms were dead. Her fire control system was dark. Her tank, her crew, her entire world was dead in the water. She could hear her commander's frantic, fading shouts over the static, something about being overrun. And in that hellish darkness, there was only one pinprick of light, the tiny, flickering flame of that very same Zippo. It illuminated a hairline crack in a secondary fuel line, a flaw so minuscule that the advanced diagnostics of the day had missed it entirely. She remembered the frantic work of her hands, wrapping the line with a clamp scavenged from a broken radio, her knuckles raw and bleeding, her heart hammering against her ribs. She remembered the desperate prayer she'd uttered as she slammed the ignition, and the glorious, life-affirming scream of the turbine catching, roaring back to life just as the first enemy T-72 appeared in her sights. The memory, visceral and searing, was gone in an instant. Clara's eyes, which for a moment had reflected the fire and terror of battle, were once again calm and steady. She snapped the Zippo shut and looked at the smug, dismissive face of the young lieutenant. "Something like that," she said quietly. Across the motor pool, Sergeant Marcus Diaz watched the confrontation unfold. He was part of the crew whose steel beast now sat broken and silent. He had remained quiet, intimidated by the lieutenant's rank and supreme confidence. But he had also grown up on stories told in hushed, reverent tones by old NCOs in dusty VFW halls. Stories of a legendary mechanic from the Gulf War, a ghost of a woman they called Clutch, who could feel what was wrong with a tank just by laying a hand on its hull. A woman who could coax dead machines back to life with nothing but intuition and a handful of tools. He never thought he'd see her in person. But when Colonel Harding had introduced the quiet old woman as Clara Callahan, a name from the legends had clicked into place. Now, he watched as Lieutenant Vance, puffed up with his own importance, moved to end the standoff. "Colonel," Vance said, his voice hard as iron, "my men are going to begin the disconnection sequence. I need this area cleared. Now." He gestured to two of his junior engineers, big kids who looked deeply uncomfortable with their new role as bouncers. "Please escort Ms. Callahan to the gate." That was the breaking point for Sergeant Diaz. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was an act of profound disrespect. As the two engineers started hesitantly toward Clara, Diaz acted on pure instinct. He slipped behind a parked Humvee, pulling out his personal cell phone. He knew he was about to shatter the chain of command, but some things were more important. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number he was looking for. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. "Riley, Master Gunner," Diaz said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "It's Sergeant Diaz from 3rd Brigade. Sir, you're not going to believe this. They've got Clutch Callahan out here." There was a pregnant pause on the other end of the line. "Say that again, Sergeant." "It's her, Master Gunner, Clara Callahan. Colonel Harding brought her in to look at our downed Abrams, and some new engineering lieutenant is about to have her thrown off the base. He's calling her a liability." The silence that followed was heavy, dangerous. Sergeant Diaz could almost feel the pressure building through the phone. The game had just changed. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew with absolute certainty that the cavalry was coming. Miles away, in a cluttered office at the U.S. Army Armor School, Master Gunner Rex Bulldog, Riley slammed his phone down with enough force to make the plastic crack. His face, a roadmap of a 30-year career etched with the suns of Iraq and the winters of Germany, flushed a deep, furious red. "Are you kidding me?" he roared to the empty room. His aide, a young captain, poked his head in, his eyes wide with alarm. "Everything all right, Master Gunner?" Riley ignored him. He stomped across the room to a wall covered in decades of plaques and unit photos, a shrine to the Armored Corps. His finger, thick as a wrench, jabbed at a faded photograph from 1991. In it, a group of young tankers, their faces smeared with soot and lit by triumphant grins, stood before an M1 Abrams. The tank's barrel was adorned with 7 crudely painted enemy silhouettes. In the center of the group, looking impossibly young, was the woman who had just been described to him over the phone. "Captain," Riley growled, his voice a low rumble of controlled fury. "Get me General Rostova. Now." The captain scrambled to comply, his fingers fumbling with the phone. "And get a convoy ready," Riley barked as an afterthought. "Multiple vehicles. Tell the general's office that the ghost of 73 Easting is being disrespected by one of her new officers." Use those exact words. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. The ghost of 73 Easting. It wasn't just a call sign. It was a title, a piece of living history. The aide's face went pale. He suddenly understood the magnitude of the storm that was about to break over the 3rd Brigade motor pool. The urgency was no longer about a broken tank. It was about defending the honor of a legend. Back at the motor pool, Lieutenant Vance was savoring his victory. Colonel Harding, though visibly distressed, had not countermanded his order. The two young engineers had approached Clara, who hadn't moved, looking at them with an expression not of anger, but of deep, weary disappointment. Vance strode forward to deliver the final blow. "Ma'am, for the final time, I am ordering you to vacate this restricted military area. If you refuse to comply, I will have the military police detain you. Is that clear?" The threat of arrest, made to a civilian guest of a full colonel, was an overreach so profound that a hush fell over the entire assembly. It began as a low rumble, a vibration felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. It was the sound of heavy vehicles moving at speed. Heads turned. Within seconds, a convoy of black command vehicles and sand-colored Humvees came into view, moving far too fast. They fanned out and screeched to a halt in a perfectly executed tactical formation, enveloping the motor pool in an atmosphere of crisis. Doors flew open. Out stepped a 2-star general, her uniform immaculate, her bearing radiating absolute command. It was General Eva Rostova. She was flanked by the furious-looking Master Gunner Riley and a retinue of senior NCOs and officers, men whose chests were heavy with ribbons and whose faces were set like stone. They moved as one, a wave of rank and righteous anger. Every soldier in the vicinity, from the lowest private to Colonel Harding, snapped to attention. Lieutenant Vance, who had been puffed up with authority just a moment before, seemed to shrink, his face draining of all color. General Rostova completely ignored him. Her eyes were locked on one person only, the old woman in the greasy fatigues. She strode across the tarmac and stopped precisely 3 feet in front of Clara Callahan. In the dead silence, she brought her hand up in the sharpest, most impeccably respectful salute of her long career. "Ma'am," General Rostova declared, her voice clear and strong. "It is a distinct honor, ma'am." Clara, looking slightly taken aback, returned a slow, tired nod. Then, Master Gunner Riley stepped forward, positioning himself so he was looking directly into Lieutenant Vance's terrified eyes. His voice was not loud, but it was cold as steel. "Lieutenant," he began, letting the rank hang in the air like an accusation. "You stand there with your tablet and your degree, and you see an old woman. Let me tell you what I see." He paused, letting the entire motor pool lean in. "I see the woman who, during Operation Desert Storm, had her tank platoon cut off and ambushed at the Battle of 73 Easting. I see the woman whose tank took 2 direct hits, disabling her comms and fire control. While under continuous, hellacious fire, this old woman crawled into her own engine compartment, diagnosed and repaired a severed hydraulic line, and single-handedly restored power to her turret. She then proceeded to manually sight and destroy 7 enemy tanks." A collective gasp went through the crowd. "She didn't have a laptop to tell her what was wrong, Lieutenant," Riley continued, his voice dripping with scorn. "She did it with a standard-issue wrench, a spare hose, and a Zippo lighter she still carries, which she used for light. And when it was over, she didn't write a report asking for a medal. She wrote the new emergency repair procedure for the entire M1 fleet, a procedure that has saved countless American lives. This woman is not a liability. She is a living, breathing legend of the United States Armored Corps. And you, son, just try to have her thrown out like a piece of trash." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the bass. The soldiers stared at Clara Callahan with a new, profound reverence. She was no longer just an old woman. She was the ghost of 73 Easting, a figure of battlefield lore made flesh. Sergeant Diaz felt a surge of pride, so intense it almost brought him to his knees. General Rostova then turned her glacial gaze upon Lieutenant Vance. The air around them seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Lieutenant," the general said, her voice deceptively calm, "you have a degree from Stanford. That is commendable. It teaches you how a machine is supposed to work. People like Miss Callahan here," she gestured to Clara, "they understand how a machine actually works, especially when it's broken, on fire, and surrounded by people who are actively trying to kill you. You have confused knowledge with wisdom. You will report to Master Gunner Riley tomorrow at 0500 hours. He is going to personally re-educate you on the meaning of respect, starting with a floor buffer and a bucket." The rebuke was total, a public and devastating dressing down. All eyes then turned to Clara, the quiet center of the storm. She finally spoke, her voice soft but carrying easily. "It's not the boy's fault, General," she said, with a surprising gentleness. "He's been taught to trust the computer, taught to look at the numbers. But a tank has a soul. It groans and shivers and complains long before it gives up. You just have to learn how to listen." She then met Lieutenant Vance's gaze. There was no malice in her eyes, only the quiet patience of a master craftsman. "You ran the diagnostics," Clara said. "But did you talk to the crew? Did you ask Sergeant Diaz here what he heard in those final seconds? What he felt through the floor plates?" Vance, stripped of all his intellectual pride, could only shake his head, utterly and completely humbled. Clara nodded slowly, then walked back to the Abrams. "Give me a heavy torque wrench," she said to a nearby mechanic. A large wrench was passed to her. She walked not to the rear engine compartment, but to a small, seemingly insignificant hydraulic fluid reservoir located near the base of the turret ring. It was a component so basic, so low-tech, that Vance's advanced diagnostics would have overlooked it as a cause for a total system failure. She raised a wrench and tapped it against the reservoir's metal casing. Instead of the clear, high-pitched ping of solid steel, it produced a dull, flat thud. She tapped it again. Thud. She looked up at the assembled group. "There's your problem," she said simply. "It's not the power unit. The computer is telling you the engine failed because it's reading a catastrophic pressure drop in the starter system. And it's right. But it's not the pump that's failing. It's this." She tapped the reservoir again. "There's a collapsed baffle inside this primary reservoir. A simple $50 part failed from metal fatigue. It's blocking the main fluid outlet. The pump is being choked, starved of fluid. The computer sees the result, zero pressure, and calls it catastrophic failure. It can't see the cause because the cause is simple mechanical breakdown." She pointed to a series of valves. "You can bypass it. Rig a temporary line from the secondary reservoir to the starter motor. It's a 3-hour fix to replace the baffle, not 3 weeks." Davenport and his team watched, mesmerized, as Clara, with the help of Sergeant Diaz, quickly and efficiently rigged the bypass line. It was a piece of elegant, practical improvisation not found in any manual. Within 10 minutes, it was done. Clara stepped back and gave a nod to the tank's crew chief. "Try her now." The crew chief hit the ignition. For a second, there was only a high-pitched whine. Then, with a deep, guttural cough, the 1,500 horsepower turbine engine caught. It roared to life with a deafening blast of sound and a plume of heat. The M1 Abrams, the dead behemoth, was alive. A spontaneous, thunderous cheer erupted from the soldiers. Months later, in a quiet diner off base, Clara sat alone with a cup of coffee. The bell above the door jingled, and in walked Lieutenant Vance. The arrogance in his posture was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. He walked over to the booth. "Ms. Callahan," he said respectfully, "I just wanted to say thank you." Clara looked up and a slow smile spread across her face. She gestured to the empty seat. "Sit down, son. Tell me, how's that old girl on rack 7 sounding? I heard she had a bit of a cough last week." Vance's face broke into a genuine smile. He slid into the booth, eager to talk, eager to learn. The torch had been passed. This story is a stark reminder that in an age dominated by data and algorithms, the irreplaceable wisdom forged in grit, experience, and hands-on struggle still holds ultimate power. True expertise isn't just displayed on a screen. It's etched into the scars on your hands and the memories in your soul, a testament to battles fought and won. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their age or appearance, only to be proven completely wrong? If you were a soldier in that motor pool watching Lieutenant Vance disrespect Clara, what would you have done? In today's high-tech world, how do you think we can best balance cutting-edge technology with the invaluable wisdom that comes from decades of hands-on experience? Let us know your thoughts below. If this story about respect and true wisdom resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories of veteran heroes. Share this video with someone who believes that experience is the best teacher and that some things can't be learned from a textbook. We read every single comment. More stories about unsung heroes of the battlefield are right there on your screen. Click to watch those next. And we'll see you tomorrow with a gripping story about a Navy SEAL's impossible survival against all odds.